World War I was unlike any war preceding it. In many respects, it was the first truly modern war. Never before had technology been put to such destructive ends. On land, at sea, and in the air, mechanized warfare was carried out with devastating efficiency. Just in case you are not sure, mechanized warfare refers to the use of advanced machines in war. Aircraft, armored vehicles, modern artillery, machine guns, these are all components of mechanized warfare. Let's take a look at the characteristics of World War I and see how new technologies were adapted in a variety of contexts. The Great War, another name for World War I, was fought on land in a much different way than the wars that predated it. Warfare in the 18th and 19th century was highly formalized. Cavalry played a critical role, and men lined up in formations to fight in open spaces. Think about the American Civil War. In major battles, Union and Confederate armies marched steadily toward one another, then fired volleys before charging. Men who took cover behind trees, rocks, or in ditches were singled out as cowards. Flash forward 50 years. World War I was completely different. The Great War was characterized by trench warfare, in which opposing armies would dig sophisticated trenches into the earth in order to provide themselves with cover. The open space between the opposing trench systems was commonly referred to as no man's land, because no man wanted to enter this dangerous area. Holed up underground for weeks and months at a time, the men living in trenches experienced horrible conditions. Cold weather, rain, mud, food shortages, rats, and disease were just a few of the difficulties they had to bear. Each side would rain down heavy artillery shells across no man's land, hoping to weaken enemy positions. Those who stuck their heads above the trench risked being hit by a sniper's bullet. The constant noise of artillery barrages day and night caused some men to suffer mental instability. When one side felt it was in a position to advance, officers ordered their men to climb over their trench and embark on a suicidal charge across no man's land, with the hope of climbing into the enemy trench and overrunning it. Another major change in World War I land warfare was the improved machine gun, which was capable of bringing death to the hundreds of men charging across no man's land. Although the Gatling machine gun saw limited action during the American Civil War, by the time the Great War broke out, machine guns had undergone dramatic, not to mention deadly, improvements. The most commonly used machine guns of the Great War were the British Vickers machine gun and the German Maschinengewehr 08 or MG-08. Artillery also improved between the Civil War and World War I. Larger, more destructive types of cannon were available throughout the Great War. The two most famous siege guns, or super guns as they were called, were the German Paris gun and Big Bertha. The roughly 240mm Paris gun, manufactured by Krupp and used to bombard Paris from the remarkable distance of 75 miles, was the largest gun of World War I. It could fire shells into the stratosphere. One of the most important innovations to come out of World War I is the tank. The world's first combat tank was invented by the British. Called the Mark I, it first saw action in September 1916 in the Battle of the Somme. The tank was originally designed so that no man's land could be safely crossed and enemy positions overrun. The British developed two variants of their tank, male with heavier guns and female with lighter guns. Recognizing the value of this new invention, the Germans developed their own tank, the A-7V, which entered service in early 1918. Another scary first of World War I involved the use of poison gas. World War I was the first war in which modern chemical warfare was used. Mustard gas and chlorine gas were among the most commonly used poison gases. To protect themselves from gas attacks, many soldiers were issued gas masks. Although submersible vessels were used in the Civil War and even the Revolutionary War, it was not until World War I that submarines saw widespread use. Germany's U-boat fleet was particularly formidable. U-boat stands for Unterseeboot, which means undersea boat in German. German U-boats were used with deadly efficiency against Allied merchant ships in the Atlantic. In May 1915, U-20 torpedoed the RMS Lusitania, resulting in its sinking and the loss of nearly 1,200 lives. Throughout World War I, the British Royal Navy was the most dominant naval force, with the Imperial German Navy following behind. In the years leading up to the outbreak of World War I, both nations, as well as others like Russia and France, modernized their naval forces. The result was that when war broke out, powerful battleships roamed the seas. Naval blockades became a common tactic as nations attempted to starve one another into submission by preventing imported goods from coming in. The Great War was also the first war in which the airplane saw widespread use. Observation balloons and other kinds of airships had been in use for decades, but were primarily designed for reconnaissance. Not surprisingly, at the beginning of the war, aircraft was used for that same purpose, reconnaissance. As the war progressed, however, the value of fighter and bomber aircraft became realized. The French in particular helped pioneer military aviation, while the British, Germans, and others soon caught on, developing their own formidable air corps. Within a short period of time, military aircraft became remarkably sophisticated. Machine guns were mounted on airplanes and became synchronized so that they could fire through the plane's propellers. One of the most famous fighter pilots of World War I is the Red Baron, a German ace renowned for his red plane. His real name was Baron von Richthofen. The Red Baron achieved 80 combat victories before being shot down and killed in April 1918. German Zeppelin airships, named after Count Ferdinand von Zeppelin, had come into production a few years before the war. Throughout the war, they were used widely for bombing and reconnaissance missions. Because they could appear directly above major cities and drop bombs, Zeppelins had tremendous psychological effects on the people of London and other Allied cities, although their military effectiveness is a matter of debate. Let's review the essential characteristics of World War I on land, at sea, and in the air. World War I was the first truly modern war. It was the first war in which mechanized warfare was carried out on a large scale. Mechanized warfare simply refers to the use of advanced machinery in war. On land, World War I was characterized by trench warfare, in which men would dig complex systems of trenches in order to provide a defensive position. Conditions in these trenches were appalling. The tank was invented during World War I by the British. The first tank, the British Mark I, saw action during the Battle of the Somme in 1916. Poison gas was also first used on a large scale during World War I, prompting soldiers to wear gas masks. Mustard gas and chlorine gas were two of the most popular chemical agents used in gas attacks. Germany developed a formidable fleet of submarines, or U-boats, and used them to target Allied merchant vessels in the Atlantic. World War I was also the first war in which the airplane saw widespread use. One of the most famous aces of the war was the German pilot Manfred von Richthofen, commonly known as the Red Baron. If there is one thing you should remember about the Great War, it is that it was a war of firsts. The first use of mechanized warfare and chemical warfare, the first use of the tank, and the first widespread militarized use of the submarine and airplane.